This is Doug DeMuro, and today we're going to talk about the most underrated enthusiast cars on the market. I picked 5 new and 5 used enthusiast cars that I think are underrated by people, by journalists, by the market right now, frankly. And I'm going to talk about which ones they are and why I think they deserve more love. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era with free listings. You can list your cool car for free and auction it on Cars and Bids. And we've had some fantastic sales recently, including this wonderful Shelby GT350R sold for almost $68,000. This fantastic 992 Porsche 911, which is wonderfully optioned, brought almost $169,000, and this Hummer EV sold for just under $230,000. If you're looking to buy or sell a cool enthusiast car from the modern era, the 1980s and up, Cars and Bids is the place to do it, with daily auctions and great selection at carsandbids.com. Alright, so 5 most underrated new cars, and then I will move on to 5 most underrated used cars. And by the way, I did these alphabetically, so they're not ranked, they're all underrated. Starting with the new BMW M3. This was probably the easiest car to pick for this list, except for one used car, which I'll get to in a minute. This car has gotten a lot of hate among the press, among car enthusiasts, mainly because, well, there's a couple factors, but one is the way it looks, and the other is that it's just kind of getting bigger like all M3s are, more luxurious, more expensive, and people don't like that. I think these people are dead wrong about the new M3 for a couple reasons. For one thing, it drives well. I think it drives fantastically. It's a fun car, it's exciting, it's enjoyable, it's got a lot of power. I think that it's more precise around corners and flatter and more stable around corners than the prior model, which I always felt was a little kind of on the big side. I think this is a great car, and I think it's amazing. And most importantly, I think it has an incredible position. You cannot get manual transmission performance sedans anymore. They don't exist. There's like 3 left, and this is one of them. And I think in 10 years, when the BMW M3 is all automatic and uses a 37 horsepower gasoline engine plus an electric motor and an electric 2-liter 4-cylinder, we're going to look back on this M3 and say, wow, that was cool. But I'm saying that now. I'm telling people, like, get over that whole thing that happens with BMWs where you need time to think it's cool, and just realize how special this is. A manual transmission, rear-wheel drive performance sedan. This is the end of the line. I'm telling you, the AMG C63 is going to a 2-liter turbo 4. This is the end of the line for cars like this. And it's a special car. So not only does it drive well, it's the last of a breed. And yeah, it's ugly. Oh, but it's ugly. Oh yeah, all that's true, but it's ugly. Okay, fine. A lot of stuff's ugly. I think that the nostrils are only going to make it stand out even more and be more valued in the future. But personally, I think the M3 is one of the most underrated cars in the market today. I think it's great. They're not selling incredibly well. Yeah, they are more expensive, more luxurious, bigger. All those things are true, but that doesn't mean it's not a great car. And it is, especially given its sort of last of an era kind of positioning. Okay, the next most underrated new enthusiast car. This is an odd choice maybe, but a Ford Mustang GT with a manual transmission. People talk about the Shelbys, they talk about the GT500s, they talk about the Hellcats, the ZL1s, but just a simple old V8 Mustang with a stick shift is an amazing car. I had one as a press car on the East Coast a long time ago, a stick V8 Mustang. And I remember I drove it one time from Philly to DC in like rural Pennsylvania and Maryland, mostly back roads. I don't know why. And it was amazing. Just geared down, hear the power, hear the engine. It was just pure fun and driving pleasure and enjoyment. And everybody makes such a big deal about the special models and electric cars and blah, blah, blah. There's all this, but like a simple GT Mustang, it's just so great. And they're affordable. You can get these are 450 horsepower cars. They start at $40,000. Like, that's a pretty good, anytime you can get $100 a horsepower, that's a pretty good price point, frankly. And This car it's just fun and it's just exciting and nobody really discusses it. Obviously Mustang fans are into it and so it gets discussed there, but in the greater community, it's not brought up all that much. The Supra gets a lot of play, the Z does, but that Mustang still slogs along doing its thing, offering great value, and in newer Mustangs, like great handling, great sound. This car is so much better than it once was. I just think it's a good car. Okay, next up, underrated brand new cars. This one I'm gonna get some blowback for, but I'm just gonna say it because I really believe it. The Mini Cooper S. The Mini first came out in like the early mid-2000s and enthusiasts loved it. It was like the darling of enthusiasts. It was a go-kart and everybody loved how little it was and how cute the advertising campaign was, and it handled incredibly well. People loved how it drove, they loved how it handled. Over time, enthusiasts have totally soured on the Mini, and now most enthusiasts I talk to actively hate the Mini. They think that it's gotten too big, too expensive, it's not as cool as it used to be. People had reliability issues, and so there's some of that also. I think that a lot of this hate is overblown, frankly. Yeah, the Mini has gotten bigger since it came out 20 years ago, but if you look at what it actually is, it's still pretty compelling. A brand new Mini Cooper S weighs around 2,800 pounds. 2,800 pounds, it's not that heavy. A brand new Golf R is 600 pounds more, 20% more weight in a Golf R. Like the Mini is still, by modern standards, a pretty light little kind of tossable car. And a Mini Cooper S, a brand new one, does 0 to 60 in 6.4 seconds with 190 horsepower. That's pretty good hot hatchback territory for like a little kind of toss it around car. You can also upgrade to the John Cooper Works model and get 230 horsepower and 2,800 pounds, which is a pretty good number. Many of these cars are manuals. It's one of the brands that is, few brands that is still offering manual transmissions and still making them in pretty decent numbers. They have beautiful, well put together interiors, especially for the price point. There's a lot of benefits about these cars, and pricing just isn't really all that much. A Mini Cooper S starts around $32,000. Golf R starts at $45,000. Now, I know the Golf R has more tech and it's got 4 doors and all-wheel drive. There's a lot of benefits to the Golf R, but we're talking about a $14,000 price differential between these two cars. It's like 40% more money. I think the Mini Cooper S still offers a lot of the makings of a good hot hatchback. Manual transmissions, decent power, lightweight, good practicality, and I think it's a shame that a lot of enthusiasts have turned their back on it because frankly, I think it's still a pretty good car. And in today's market, I think it's an overlooked one, especially by enthusiasts who only care about the fact that it's gotten bigger than it was, but aren't paying attention to the fact that it's lighter than a lot of hot hatchbacks. Okay, next up, new enthusiast cars that I think are underrated. To me, this next one is really obvious. That would be the new Subaru WRX. Drove by a Subaru dealer a couple weeks ago, and there's 4 new WRXs sitting out front. Drove by a second Subaru dealer yesterday, and there's 5 new WRXs sitting out front. This is in a situation where automakers are supply constrained and most car dealers can't keep cars on the lot. Now, these dealers might be asking way over sticker and nobody wants to bite, but the point is people are biting it over sticker on a lot of cars, and this came out like yesterday and nobody's really buying them. And these cars haven't gotten a lot of positive feedback, especially from enthusiasts and buyers. Journalists have generally liked it, but enthusiasts and potential buyers have been pretty negative about it for a few reasons. And these are things that annoy me also. It looks like Subaru's not going to come back with an STI model, which I think is insane, but they're not. They forced a lot of the good features onto the automatic transmission version, which isn't really what everybody wants. You know, 80% of sales are manual, so it makes no sense. So enthusiasts kind of feel like Subaru is letting go of the WRX, betraying them in a sense, and I understand that. People also complain that power wasn't raised and that the car doesn't look good, and those are complaints I don't disagree with. But it drives well. At the end of the day, it just drives well. The thing about the WRX is, like, yeah, it's ugly, power isn't improved, they're trying to push the good features on the auto, they're not doing an STI, they're not doing a hatchback, all these things are annoying, but it just drives well. It's a good car, it's fun, it's fast, it handles well, it's still affordable, it's still everything that we've always liked about the WRX. And I get why people aren't biting, I especially get why they're not biting it way over sticker, if that's what dealers are asking, but I think it's just a good car. And I think it's a good car at sticker, and I think it's just nice. And so I get why people have complaints about it, whatever, but having driven it, and I spent a lot of time in it, I'm into it. And that's all I can say. Okay, last enthusiast car that I think is underrated on the market today. This is an interesting one. A lot of people might disagree with this, or enthusiasts might, and that would be the Tesla Model 3 Performance. This is an interesting one because the Model 3 is always discussed in the sense of it's technology and its capability. Self-driving, autopilot, the screen, the fact that it's electric, and that's a big deal. Elon Musk and Tesla as a brand and all that, that's where people discuss it. And that's fine, and it makes sense to discuss it there. But I think that people actually miss one thing about this car, which is that it's pretty fun to drive. Now, in a straight line, of course it's fun to drive. It has 480 horsepower, does 0 to 60 in 3.2 seconds, so it's obviously fast. But it's not just that. I think it handles well. The steering is great. They've tuned it so the steering is very precise, very direct, and it drives pretty well. It's got a lot of weight down low. It doesn't quite drive like an M3, but it handles well. And so you have this very fast car that's very good handling, but nobody really even pays attention to that because they're so focused on the tech side of it, and because a lot of enthusiasts haven't yet adopted electric cars, and specifically a lot of enthusiasts are pretty skeptical of Teslas. But actually, it's a pretty good enthusiast car, and I'm pretty impressed with the way it drives. And I think more enthusiasts should pay attention to them, especially as they start to depreciate, and you can pick up a car that does 0 to 60 in 3.2 seconds. When they get into the 30s, that's gonna be a pretty good bargain, frankly. You can beat every Hellcat off the line. Okay, so next I wanna cover 5 used enthusiast cars that I think are overlooked and underrated in the enthusiast car world. Number 1, this is a big one for me, and I always sing its praises, the new ACURA NSX. And I say new even though I'm talking about a used car. It came out back in 2017, I guess. And they're still making them today. They're kind of just finishing the production run, but I'm specifically referring to like the early models and as this car ages. This is a supercar that's available in the high 130s for pricing. You can get one. It'd be a cheap one, but 140s, 150s will buy you one all day. And frankly, that's an amazing number for a car with 575 horsepower that does 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. And that's fun to drive, and that looks good. Everyone agrees new NSX looks good. A little boring, but it looks good. And it's reliable, like it's an Acura. It's gonna work. And I'm blown away when I see and hear of people buying used McLarens at the same price point or more, getting the same performance, and taking on the potential reliability burden of a used McLaren. I think the NSX is totally overlooked, and you gotta factor in the truth that they made less than 3,000. There's like 2,800 new NSXs or something like that. Very small production number. This car, they made 4,000 of them, and nice ones are now selling for $850,000. Mine is not a nice one. It's nice, but it's high mileage and it wouldn't sell for that. But my point is the NSX has a lower production number than this like iconic special car. And nobody's paying attention to it. And I really think that that car at 140 is an absolute bargain and is totally being overlooked right now by enthusiasts. Okay, next one, underrated used enthusiast cars, Audi TT RS, and specifically the original TT RS. There were 2 versions offered. The first one was in 2012, 2013. The second was like 2018 and up. I'm specifically talking about the original, the 2012-13 model, which are easy to find today in the mid-30s to low 40s price-wise. I don't get why, I think these cars are priced okay. I don't get why nobody ever talks about them. I think that this car deserves way more publicity and excitement than it gets. For one thing, it was really limited production. I think they sold maybe a few hundred of them in the United States for those 2 model years, 12 and 13. But also, they all had manual transmissions. They all had all-wheel drive. It was a true Audi RS car, which is really cool. It had 360 horsepower, which was more than any Porsche Cayman in 2012, including the Cayman R, which was the top-line version of the Cayman. That was at 330. The TTRS is sitting there at 360 with a mandatory manual. Cayman R you could get with an automatic. This seems like an obvious car to me that more people should pay attention to, and I think they ignore it because the Audi TT, the base car, is generally ignored. It's, you know, automatics, and they were seen as not true sports cars and not really all that great, blah, blah, blah. You know, I get it, and that's not untrue, especially about that generation of TT. But the TT RS was a serious car, low production, high power, manual only, an RS car, all-wheel drive. It has all the makings of a really cool, and turbo 5-cylinder is a pretty cool thing when you think about it. And I think that that car deserves a lot more love in the enthusiast market. I don't necessarily think it should be more expensive. I think it makes sense where it's priced, given the performance level and where it is, but I just think people should talk about it more and get more excited about it. You don't just hear that much about it. Okay, next up, used enthusiast cars that I think are underrated. This is gonna be controversial, but I think the E60 BMW M5. Hear me out. I reviewed the E60 M5 a couple years ago, and I talked about how horribly unreliable that car is. And it is horribly unreliable. The powertrain was not properly tested, not properly vetted by BMW before it got out, and engines blow in these cars. They did when the car was basically new. They're still blowing to this day. Full engine replacements are not uncommon. The car was just not developed correctly and fully. But the car has now been out for 15 years, and the issues that it has are pretty well known, and they're extensive and they are costly to fix. However, I think one of the things that people aren't thinking about with this car is that when you do fix those issues, you got a V10 naturally aspirated manual transmission rear-wheel drive sedan. And that is a serious thing. 500 horsepower. That car will never be made again. It will never exist again in the entire history of the automobile. I don't really understand why it was made in the first place. Like, it was a crazy thing even then, but horsepower and engine size wars were totally escalating in the mid-2000s, and this car is a fantastic result of that. And they maybe rushed it to the market to try to get in there and do this, and that's probably why the powertrain is so unreliable. But I think the point I want to make with the E60 M5 is, it's unreliable, it's bad, it's got a lot of issues, but if you get those issues solved, you can be in one for like $20,000 to $25,000 to $30,000 with a sorted car, a well-done sorted car, maybe even a manual. And you've got a V10 rear-wheel drive. It doesn't make sense that it's that cheap. People stay away from them because of the issues, because they're nervous about them. But if you solve the issues at a significant cost and time expense, you can have a very special car. And I think long-term, this might go down as the most special M5 as a result. Okay, next one. This is, to me, the single most obvious car on this entire list. Underrated enthusiast cars, used enthusiast cars. The original Ferrari California. I think that this car is criminally underrated. And I understand what you're gonna say. That's the base model Ferrari. Okay. It's the base model Ferrari. What are you driving? A Nissan Z? I mean, come on. Like, it was still an amazing car. Yes, it is ugly. Yes, it's the entry Ferrari. And now that that's out of the way, let's talk 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds. 3.8 seconds, 0 to 60. 450 horsepower, 360 pound-feet. It's also a Ferrari, and it handles incredibly well, and it drives and steers incredibly well, and it's fast, and it's a Ferrari. It sounds great. It has 4 seats, technically. It has a folding hardtop, so it's a convertible, which is cool. People ignore this car because of its position in Ferrari's lineup, but it was an awesome car, and I think it's so stupid how ignored this car is. You can find these right now for 90 grand in rough shape or with high miles. Decent ones are like $100,000 to $115,000. That is a steal, especially for a dual clutch era Ferrari. This was a reliable powertrain in a fast car that is a Ferrari, and these cars should be bringing way more money. They're special, they're good. And people just ignore it because it's the base model Ferrari. And finally, last on my list of underrated used enthusiast cars, the original Porsche Boxsters. So the 986 model, which was sold, I guess, from like 97 to 04, and then the 987, which was 05 to 08. We'll cap it at the second gen 987s are not underrated. Most Porsche people focused on the 911. And if they're not focused on that, then they're focused on the Cayman. But the Boxster is an amazing car, and it offers something the Cayman doesn't, which is a convertible. You can have a lot of the Cayman's benefits and still be one with the open air, and I think that's fantastic. Early 986 Boxsters are still like Boxster S, like a nice 986 Boxster S is like a teens, high teens, low 20s car. That's a pretty good number for that car. And a 987 is like low to mid 20s for a decent one. That's an amazing number for a car like this. It's a Porsche. Yeah, it's not a 911, it's not a Cayman, but it's fun. It's a fun, fast, enjoyable car to throw around and to really have fun with. And I've always felt the mid-engine Porsches are set up better than the rear-engine ones. They're more fun, they're really more engaging and exciting. And I think that these cars are totally undervalued. And a lot of people look at them and think, well, it's not a 911. But I think if the 911 didn't exist, we would talk about the Boxster and the Cayman as like some of the very most special sports cars on the market in the last 20 years. But because the 911 has always overshadowed them and has this sort of stigma, but if you get past that and actually just want a car to drive and enjoy, an early Boxster is a seriously, seriously good car for that purpose. So there you go, 10 enthusiast cars that I think are underrated, new and used, not necessarily saying undervalued for most of these cars, but just not appreciated enough by car enthusiasts and by people, but I think they should be.